everyone, and welcome to another episode of SaaS Leaders Lounge. And today we have Jonny Tennyson with us. Hi, Jonny. How are you doing?
Hey, Paris. I'm very good. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. It's a pleasure to have you. And I've seen that you've been in the customer success world for quite a while now, working for some great organizations. And just before we dive specifically into your background in customer success, I really wanted just to get an overview of your early career and what led you into technology.
Sure, I'd love to. So I've been a tech nerd, a self-confessed tech nerd for as long as I can remember. I think probably one of my earliest memories of I'd say a pivotal moment in knowing that it was going to be my future career was when I was 8 years old. I was about 8 years old. Could be 8, could be 9, could be 7, but around 8. I was in a PC World store, like they were back in the day everywhere, and it was a really big one. It was great, and I used to go around and just like play with all the PCs. But I would go into like the settings and set alarms and all sorts of like mischievous things. And my parents were sort of in two minds about it. They were like, "Well, he's causing mischief in a store, which he probably shouldn't be, but maybe this is the direction he'll go in." And they were exactly right. So whenever I was 16, I got my first job in Tesco's, which was an interview that I got because my mum knew someone who worked there and they were hiring. So, she managed to kind of get me my first interview pretty quickly, very quickly, actually. I just turned 16 and I hated it. For the first, I lasted about 3 months there and I was like, I don't like this at all. So my mum said to me, if you don't like it, get another job. So I went straight to PC World, and luckily enough, they were hiring, and that got me started selling on the shop floor. And really, my first core skills were around sales, and that was the thing that carried me through most of my career up until this point. And even as a CS leader, I still consider myself to be very commercial, and I love getting into those types of conversations because they're ones that really drive me. But throughout my whole career, it's always been tech for me. I've never been far away from tech, and I don't think I could really consider being far away from it because I love talking about it. Whether it's talking about large software platforms that are doing really cool things, or whether it's talking about getting a new smartwatch. I am at all ends and areas of tech. I don't think there's a single area that I'm not interested in. So definitely in the right spot as far as where my career's gone so far.
And I guess in that first role where you was at PC World, you were probably working within the technology section, right, where they had the laptops and the phones, and you were able to speak to customers and build that understanding of what they were looking for. You probably was an expert to some extent in, all of the fine details of each laptop and what, the RAM speed was and what was the best for what they were looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. By the time I joined PC World, I'd already built, I think, 3 PCs by that point. So I knew them inside and out. And the story around my first one's probably my favorite one. It'll probably be my favorite PC that I have ever built to this day, because I've built a few since. And so my father, he worked in the public sector, and he went to the IT department, which was like 2 guys with just a bunch of components. And he said, have you got enough spare components, broken components, used components for me to bring home to my son to build a PC? Their answer was, we have no idea, but here's a large box of stuff and maybe it'll work. So my dad came home with this massive just crate of various assorted PC bits taken from 2 or 3 different generations of old PCs that they've been using. And eventually I managed to get the right combination of stuff to make it work, and it ran and it was great. So it was my first ever PC. So that really launched me into wanting to get into the nitty-gritty and the details. So when it comes to the very technical specs, the internal specs, and talking about those down to kind of chipsets and things like RAM and their various speeds and how important that is. I love talking about that stuff and loved it before right enough going into the PC World. But the biggest thing that surprised me was whenever I started working in PC World, I figured I was just going to be talking about PCs. So I thought this is going to be the easiest job in the world for me. That was when I learned that actually the job wasn't to know about PCs, it was to learn how to sell. And that was probably the thing that caught me off guard. And it took me a while to get that mindset shift, because I was so excited about just going in and talking about PC specs for a full shift, which wasn't what it was. But there was a little bit of that, obviously. But the learning how to sell bit was probably the bit I had to adjust to the most, because I was not anticipating that. I was naive as a 16-year-old and getting a job in PC world. I assumed that's what it would be, but I still enjoyed it all the same.
And then from PC World, you went to Intel. You had a little stint there, and then you moved on to SolarWinds. And I guess that was a company that was really growing at the time, and you was sitting in the channel account management team. So that transition, now working inside of software companies, how was that shift for you, and how was you able to acclimatize to that? And what were the early lessons that you had to learn, and skills that you had to develop along that early journey?
Yeah, that was quite a big one, because so whenever I got the role at Intel, that was like the dream job for me. So I moved down from Edinburgh to Swindon for that one, and I just got so caught up in it. It was like it was the dream, and they had a great place down in Swindon that was a pretty big office, a really good office, full of great people. And what I really loved was the fact that, like, they made you feel so part of the brand. They did such a good job of that. So I got really caught up in that, because I'm very easily encouraged and do get caught up in that sort of type of thing. So I absolutely loved it. And for the 2.5, 3 years I was there, I was just really living the dream. And the move to SolarWinds was driven by a couple of things. One was, from a career perspective, it seemed like just like a good move. It was a good role that I moved into, and I was actively looking to get more involved in software, because most of my conversations in my career to that point had been really more hardware related. There was obviously some consumer level software conversations, but I really wanted to get into B2B software, and SolarWinds provided that opportunity. It also, from a personal life move, gave me an opportunity to move back to Scotland. So that was a big driver in that. But yeah, the shift to SolarWinds was a big one, because it was a 100% channel based company. So that was a new thing for me to learn. Relatively new thing for me to learn at that point was the ins and outs of selling to the channel through managed service providers. So it was a good move. And I learned an awful lot in that. There was I think I went from the shift from hardware into software. I knew enough about software to be able to hit the ground running. It was more the nuances around how software is sold, and just general SaaS ways of operating was something that was quite new to me. But it was a good shift, and I think for my career since, it's all been SaaS based, and it probably will be for some time, I think. So it was a good move.
Nice. And then you had a stint at Fortinet. I guess that would have been your first real step into the cybersecurity world. And how was that transition for you personally?
Yeah, it was an interesting one. So I ended up at Fortinet actually through acquisition. So I'd originally joined a very exciting startup called ZoneFox, which to this day is one of the coolest brands I think I've ever worked for. And that was an Edinburgh-based startup, had a local team of super cool people who I really loved working with. And we were working on software that detected insider threat. So that was a very exciting area of cybersecurity, because it was looking at behaviors of people who work for you primarily. So it was very interesting. Lots of very, very cool stories. We could probably do a whole podcast on the stories alone of stuff of the stories that we uncovered there and experienced. But we were acquired in October 2018, and then we were brought into the Fortinet family. So that again was a very big shift, because I'd gone from being a vendor of a single product to a huge vendor like Fortinet, where I had sort of 40 plus lines of other products to get skilled up on and be able to pitch to customers in the same way as we would with ZoneFox.
Jonny, with the acquisition, how was that meaningful for you, and allowed you to grow personally, as there would be a restructuring, I guess, in many cases when this does happen? talk me through how that impacted you personally and enabled you to take the next step.
Sure. So it was quite an exciting time, the acquisition, mainly because I was very vocal about it. I was having a lot of fun at Zone Fox. I actually didn't want to be acquired, if I'm honest. So for a lot of people, it was good news. But for me, I was like, no, I'm loving this journey. It's a great part of my career. Really enjoying the role, loving the company, and so I grabbed onto that quite a tight grip. And so I had a little bit of personal growth to do, shall we say, through that acquisition. But honestly, when we were acquired by Fortinet, I really couldn't say a bad word about it because they treated us really, really well and they welcomed us with open arms. It was my first ever, because it was my first ever startup that I've been a part of. It was also my first ever acquisition that I'd gone through. So it was a new time for me, and I probably had some very unformed opinions that I was still sharing in the early stages anyway. But ultimately, as the acquisition went through and we started to really merge with the rest of the Fortinet family, I've kind of found my feet a little bit there. And managed to get some good traction, and I started to really enjoy it because they were treating us really, really well. And whenever the pandemic hit, they made a commitment to not lose any staff globally, and they had they had a really good approach to how to look after people there, which was really good. And honestly, it was really fun because I all of a sudden because they had so many staff, I had so many new colleagues and contacts, and they did a great job of ensuring that we had good time to spend with each other and team building and all that good stuff. So I ended up really enjoying it, and it was a quite a big shift for me because it was a shift that I hadn't instigated. And generally speaking, up until that point, most of the decisions in my career had been made by me, not by anybody else. So that was something that I had to live with and just learn to actually make the best of it, which I eventually did. And that opened me up to some very interesting opportunities because it was a good name to have in my resume. It was a good experience because it was such a different company than what I've been working at in the past. It would be even difficult to compare them to Intel, despite them both being massive companies themselves, and Fortinet, one of the biggest names in cybersecurity since ever. So it was good. I think probably one of the most exciting bits for that was the fact that because they have so many different product lines, it allowed me to dip my toe into a lot of different technologies that I hadn't either considered or had only lightly touched on in the past. So that in itself was very exciting for me during that time. And then ultimately, it set me up for a couple of good moves after that as well.
Amazing. And as you mentioned, with so many different product lines, it must have enabled you also to grow your wealth of knowledge in some of those products and really enhance your understanding of the wider cybersecurity landscape, the needs of the customers. And as we move into more of a specific discussion around customer success leadership, I wanted just to touch on a point that could be something that you may have experienced, whether it was during this acquisition or maybe after, but it's a point about vulnerability. And, when there is acquisitions, I guess so many people that I speak to and have been involved in these do feel, an element of vulnerability because there's that uncertainty, the unknown, doing something that you haven't maybe done before, had to experience something new. And was that the case there during that acquisition?
Yeah, absolutely. So because I was so resistant to change, such a dramatic change like an acquisition can be a very difficult thing to acclimatize or make peace with. And so I would say it was an opportunity that if I had gone through it again, I probably would have embraced it a lot earlier than I did because I was quite resistant to it. But hindsight's 2020, and I learned a lot from that. And actually looking at what became almost an opportunity cost for me, me spending all this time resisting the acquisition was time that I was losing when actually I could have just jumped in with both feet from day one and could have had access to all of those various technologies a lot earlier. And so it took me a while to really discover that actually they were quite happy for me to get involved in any product line I saw fit or anything that I was interested in. And it wasn't until I got to that point, a little bit later than I'd hoped, that I'd realized that actually sometimes this kind of change can be a massive growth opportunity. And that's a lesson that I'll certainly carry with me.
And that growth was very evident in the time it took you then to move into a leadership role within customer success, right? So the topic for this episode is about leading teams from the front. And I guess in your time at Fortinet, you were afforded the opportunity to lead up the department. And how was that for you personally? And how was you really able to um, lead from the team for the customers and also for your team as well?
So for me, the interesting thing was my first proper experience would have been the opportunity that I had after Fortinet, and also just before it. So at ZoneFox, we were a very small team, and we were starting to grow, and we were talking about lots of very exciting plans, and we had started to lay down some very interesting plans for the next kind of year or two. But whenever I was at Fortinet, the opportunity that I moved into at Arius Risk was the probably the biggest opportunity for me, because that, in terms of growth from zero to something very big, that was the move for me. So at Arius Risk, we were, I think I was employee number 24, 25, I would say, and I was the one and only post sales person. So when they'd hired me, they said, we don't have a post sales function and we need one. So for me, that was just a let's go and do this. I mean, it was about 3 months into a pandemic where I had a very secure job with Fortinet, and people thought I was crazy for going and joining what was a Spanish startup that everybody in my network had never heard of. So it was a huge risk, but it was one of the best risks if not the best risk I've taken in my career to this point. So we built up a post-sales function. I'd hired pre-sales people because we needed those too. Hired CSMs, hired what we refer to as CSAs, customer solutions architects, which is like a technical CS engineer role, and also a support team from scratch. There was a lot of stuff that we built there, and so that was definitely the the the, the biggest opportunity through my career. It was also definitely the biggest challenge, where it definitely was not a 40-hour-a-week job. Like 40 hours would not have got the job done, and so that was the area where I had to really roll up my sleeves and do a lot of stuff across a lot of different functions as well. So yeah, that was quite difficult, but it was a
It's,
good process.
it does sound really exciting. And I guess through the pandemic, trying to hire so many different people must have been really difficult. And what was the challenges you faced when you were really trying to grow those various teams in such a uncertain time for many people, maybe not wanting to take the risk of changing jobs, especially to a company that they'd maybe never heard of?
Yeah, that was a really fun one. So one of the things that we did have that to this day was a really powerful asset was having a good recruiter on board who knew our business inside and out. So there was one recruiter that who we used for basically all of our hires, because they knew us and they were able to speak to our business and get excited like we would to what was a great pool of candidates that they got in for us. But for us, there was a big job to sell joining Arius, because a lot of people, Arius Risk is a threat modeling platform, and threat modeling right now is a very exciting area of cybersecurity, but it is still growing. So there are a lot of people out there who they may have heard the term, but they don't actually know what threat modeling is. And by my own admission, I was in a similar boat at the start of it. So we had to sell people on the idea that this is a very exciting company. It's a great platform, and it's going to be a good move for your career to join us, and you'll be at the forefront of what is a rapidly growing area of cybersecurity. So we had quite a big job to do that, and also trying to find the right candidates, because it needed to be everyone who joined the team. They needed to be the kinds of people who knew that we do need quite a lot from you for because we're building something here. So what was most important for us were people who had a natural affinity for wanting to be part of something that was growing. There were so many different opportunities out there for people who are in cybersecurity already, that it can't just be someone who is looking for another similar role than what they're doing. It
Yeah.
can't be someone who wants to just earn an extra 10-15% on their salary. It needed to be, you can still want all those things, but the most important thing must be you want to be part of this journey and where we're going, because where we're going is really exciting, but we need people who will actually get us there. So that's sort of the double-edged sword with that. for me, it was why I was super excited about it, and why for me it was just a no-brainer, because I thought, yeah, I want to build this, because this is a tiny thing and it needs to be a very, very big thing. And if I can help make it a big thing, then I'll be able to look back on it and go, yeah, I did that. I built that big thing. And so we needed to ensure that everybody who came on board was just effortlessly enthused by that. It was something that was a real personal mission for them. And I think we did a really good job of getting the right people to help us with that. Not that it was easy, definitely not, but it was very rewarding for, I think, everybody who joined.
And growing a team, I guess, is never going to be something that's done overnight. It takes time, a lot of effort, a lot of preparation. But once you were able to build out this team, if you don't mind me asking, how big was you able to scale those various different teams?
So we grew from 1 to, I think it was about 15 or 16 at that point, in the space of around 2.5 years, which for what was a 23 person or 25, 26, whatever it was, sub 30, shall we say, sub 30 person company. That's rapid growth to have in a single function. That was the post sales function growth. You can extrapolate, I'm sure, to then imagine all the other functions that were growing around it, that all of the processes that we were building from scratch weren't just processes that we owned and ran. They were also processes that interacted with other functions, which were growing just as rapidly. So sales and customer success, for example, those two, I'm a big believer that they have to have an absolute interlock. That there should not be a handover from sales to CS, that should be continuous. And so we're trying to build this CS function, they're trying to build a sales function. Within that sales function, you've also got sub functions and different team members. They're building their own processes. So that was almost the thing, was we had this huge plane that we were building, and we had so many different things that were being built onto that plane, that you almost had to make sure that one person wasn't building something that wouldn't fit, or that would make that plane too heavy or something, take that analogy however you will, but that was sort of what it felt like. We had to almost step back a little bit and kind of go, right, can you tell me what you've been working on in your side of the business, because we want to make sure that what we're building isn't going to break that, or vice versa.
And I guess in a sub 30 person company, there's going to be a lot of collaboration and clear communication needed to make sure that the collaboration goes really well. And when you look at how the team scaled, what would you say how important was it for you to, from a perspective of a startup, really develop the documentation, the processes? I guess you were actively involved in this, right? And needed to do so in a way that was scalable for the business in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my career up to that point, most of the time there were processes that already existed. There was documentation that already existed, and there was, anything to do with messaging, anything internal, anything external, just everything was. Yeah. It's very strange for me these days, anytime I join an organization, because I'll go into whatever resources they've got, or go into their Google Drive or whatever they're using for their storage, and I'll immediately just start digging, and it's just crazy to see how much stuff they have. Like, wow, you already have all these things. This is great. Because back at Arius, there were some outdated things, and it wasn't being actively maintained by a single person, because sub 30 people, everyone's got their own role, almost their own function. And so it was really difficult to have a big pool of resources. But so there was a lot of documentation built. And we built the team around that to a degree. So people who would come on board, one of the things we would say is, you'll be expected to create some assets here as well. We want you to create reusable assets. We want you to create articles in support. The CEO, Stephen DeVries, he was very insistent, and rightly so, that if you solve an issue for a customer, don't just solve the issue. Note down how you did it and create an article. Because what is the likelihood that someone's going to have a one-off issue with a software platform? It's it's not that likely. If one person runs into that issue, you're almost definitely going to have another person run into that issue. So he was a big believer of, if you solve an issue, document it, make it reusable. So don't just solve it for a customer, solve it for all of them. And that was a thing that we took on board quite a lot, and it was definitely the right direction.
And as you were refining the processes along the way, I guess, how involved are you in customer enablement as such?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's almost one of the cores of the function. If anything, I think sometimes customer success is seen as customer enablement only, which I think is a bit of a shame sometimes. I think just as an industry, we're still not getting that right. So enablement is a super important part of it, because ultimately we need to enable the customers, because that's how we keep them. And if they're not seeing success, if they're not seeing a good return on their investment, they're not going to keep paying. So enablement's really key for us. And I think one of the big shifts that, in terms of maturity, if you're doing an onboarding process and you have an onboarding process, and it sort of stops at the end of that onboarding process, then there's a maturity gap there in terms of where you should be. So a great onboarding process, first off, it needs to begin before they've actually signed, in my opinion. This is why the sales and CS interlock is absolutely vital, because that onboarding does need to begin before they sign. But also, it needs to not have an end date. It's if you're lucky enough to have a software platform that you just switch on and it works, cool. I don't think there are many of those out, if there are any at all. And I think for certainly all the products that I've been involved in from a CS perspective, one of the most important things has been ensuring that it's less of an onboarding and more of an everboarding. For me, there's almost no such thing as a healthy customer, because as soon as you think they're healthy, you're going to look at another one and take your eyes off that one. So enablement is something that never stops. It never stops. And if they have a great rollout for a successful year, brilliant. Now you've got your year 2 rollout, whatever that looks like. The increase in usage and expansion of how the customer uses your platform. So enablement is very much top of mind, because it never stops.
Amazing. And I guess in the role you're doing today at Code Warriors, and even at Arius Risk before that, being in a small environment, a small team, I guess you would have had to lead from the front. And I just wanted you to share a few examples of where you really took the lead and was able to still be hands-on with the customers, and ensure that they were getting the best return on investment, and ensuring good customer experience from their perspective.
This is a very interesting one, because I think one of the big learnings that I took away from Arius was, because I joined as the sole post-sales person, I was involved in everything. If it was support, if it was onboarding, if it was renewals, all that stuff, it was absolutely everything. And the problem was, there was an important lesson that I learned in this, was that as we grew, I found that for our biggest customers, I probably still stayed too close to them. So as a result, we were hiring CSMs, but then I wasn't going away. I wasn't stepping back to go and do some of the more strategic stuff, which I wanted to do earlier. But through fault of my own, and an inability to let go, I really struggled to take a step back. But I've also since seen examples of where there are some people in CS leadership positions where they don't get involved. They're just kind of like, cool, just report back to me. And I think whenever I reflect on it, probably the thing that I've really learned has been, when it comes to where the sweet spot for that stuff is, if you're a CSM and you're looking to go into management, if you're looking to go into management because you think it'll allow you to take a bit of a step back from customers, that ain't it. That's not what moving into a CS leadership role is. What it is it's a shift from having your own dedicated customer base to now inheriting everyone's. So if you've got a team of 5 people, their customer base is your customer base. It just multiplied by 5. And instead of having the nice weekly check-in calls, maybe you've got a nice customer that you like speaking to on a Friday, you talk about your weekend, and generally things go really well. Those aren't the conversations you're involved in anymore. The conversations you're involved in across this customer base that is, for this example, 5 times the size, are the escalations, are the things whenever stuff goes wrong and then you get brought into, or for rollouts that are stuck, where you want to go in and just kind of give them a nudge along and say, hey, listen, here's a different face, allow me to share some experience with you and things that we think that we should be doing together. So leading from the front really means now narrowing the scope of the types of conversations that you get involved in, but not really the number of conversations that you get involved in. If anything, they multiply. So yeah, so I've got a few, more than a few examples throughout my years of times where I've had to be brought in, but I would say that for the most part, it's been either whenever something is stuck or whenever stuff goes wrong, which is fine. That's what you accept whenever you move into that type of role.
And if we talk about along your journey, has there been any mentors that have really helped you to elevate your skills and maybe enhance your knowledge in areas that you wouldn't have maybe been able to do without a mentor? And is that something you're actively involved in now as a leader yourself?
Yeah, 100%. So I get asked a lot about this particular topic because I've been lucky to be in positions of mentoring people, and I've been even luckier to be in the position of being mentored. So whenever I look back through some of my previous managers, because it's always been a manager for me, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. It could be a colleague, it could be a friend. Ultimately, you want to find people who are in the place where you want your career to be. And you should be selfish about that. You should, become friendly with them. You should ask them the kinds of questions. How do I get into the position that you're in? That sort of thing. Or if it's someone who's more junior and they've got a few steps to go, show them a good path through that. Show them behaviors that can get them there. I am absolutely the sum of some of my previous mentors because I've been lucky enough to have people who've been really successful, but not just because of their job titles or where they work or things like that, but because of the attitudes that they have. And that for me has always been the thing that I tend to gravitate towards whenever I'm looking for a mentor, is someone who's got the kinds of attitudes that I wish I had more instinctual or had more muscle memory around, the kinds of attitudes that I wish I could convey naturally. And I think that if you're around those kinds of people long enough, you do start to absorb it because you start to understand how they're able to have those great attitudes towards working. And yeah, for me, from someone who's been mentored, I think the types of lessons that I've learned have been, half of them have been explicit lessons and half of them have just been things that I've picked up, through just working closely with them. You pick those things up, and sometimes there will be explicit lessons, but I think a lot of the stuff is just almost absorbing from it. Now, from a mentoring perspective, I have always maintained that, in my opinion, there is nothing better for your career that you can do than mentoring someone. There is nothing more introspective than trying to help someone else with their career and mentor them, because it forces you to look at your own career in a way that you didn't before. Because what I find is that a lot of the time I don't share the things that I do that work. I share the things that I did that didn't, because I learned so much more from those. And I don't think I've ever looked at the mistakes that I've made in the past more than when I've been trying to mentor someone, because it forces me to look at those. And as a result, it almost helps me to relearn those lessons. So it's huge. And I think for anybody who's listening, if you have an opportunity to either mentor or be mentored, you should absolutely grab onto both of those opportunities with both hands, because the transformation of your career is really quite sudden almost. It doesn't take a long time for a mentor to have a real impact on someone's career, and that person could be you, or it could be you impacting somebody else's career, and either way you will get a lot of personal growth, whichever side of that you're on.
And just going back to the vulnerability piece that we discussed earlier, I guess being from both perspectives, a mentee and a mentor, you having to share your failures or lessons that you've learned can sometimes make leaders feel like they are, vulnerable to some extent, but a lot of the time it's empowering, right? Say, look, these are lessons that I've learned, and this is what I've been able to develop skill wise from those lessons. But then speaking to a lot of candidates in the market, sometimes I find for them, they they can feel, nervous and anxious to go up to somebody that's, maybe 2 or 3 levels above them in the organization and say, hey, I really want to be in a position like yourself in the next 10 years, and I would love for you to be a mentor for me. But we always try to say, look, at the end of the day, everybody is human. Everyone generally wants to help people, right? And, if they can shed some light on their journey and their experiences, if it's done in the right way, then it will be great. And sometimes you will find that, like dating, not everyone is compatible, right? It's about
Yeah.
finding the people that have not only the personality, but also the experience and the skills to where you want to get to in your next step of your career. So that's always something I try to say to people moving forward. But from your experience finding or working with mentees, would you say that it's important for them to have more of an open dialogue rather than it being okay every time we have a session, whether it's once a week, once a month, that it is they come to you with a list of questions and it's almost, pre-formatted and expected to be run in that order? Or do you think it's a bit of give and take? So they should have some questions, but the mentors should also have some objectives or some goals based on previous conversations for them to action and move towards?
So I've never had. It's a good question. I've never used any kind of formal structure. I think the one thing I would hate from my perspective, if I was being a mentor to someone, I wouldn't want to make it so formal as it to seem like a manager one-to-one. Where there should be an agenda and there should be, both people are contributing to it and all that stuff, and we use it for check-ins. I think where it's worked the most for me have been spending time working closely regularly, and also it's the more the casual the informal discussions, just the stuff that isn't too structured but is still focused on work and career, um and yeah, so I think those kinds of structures are probably. I know that there are some differing opinions, because I know that some people do run very structured mentorship programs, and that doesn't tend to be the format that suits me that well. Whereas I quite like the ad hoc sessions and the ad hoc questions, and just if you need me, just if you've got a question about something you're working on, just let me know. Let's chat about it, that sort of thing. And I think for someone that I was mentoring for a while, we spent a lot of time together, but it was just generally water cooler chat. Let's go for lunch, that kind of stuff, the ad hoc stuff. And it's just the regular check-ins. So we did it in a way that was, we would talk quite regularly anyway, but we would get deeper into those topics when it felt right. So there wasn't we'll do this once a month, or we'll do this once every 2 weeks. It'll be, we keep in touch, we see each other pretty much every day at work, and then sometimes we'll go off on lunch, dive into things a little bit deeper. So yeah, that tends to be the format that, as I say, works best for me.
Amazing. And if we talk about advice in these sessions, is there any key piece of advice that's really stuck with you throughout your career from a mentor that you've had in the past? And is there any advice that you've given that you think really stands out and has really helped a mentee to elevate their career to the next level?
Yeah, I've got a few, but my favorite one, or at least my favorite one this month, because next month I'll probably have another one that I'm going to share with people every other week. So whenever I was very early on in my career, I was very, very hungry for management roles far ahead of my time, like really far ahead of my time. I definitely wasn't ready for them, but I was still knocking on the door, being like, make me a manager. I want to be a manager, before I even really knew why or what it entailed. I just thought it's a cool title. I really, I want to do that. That's the expected route for people, which in itself is another topic, because I don't think it is actually the the only ladder that people should go on these days. But the one of the most important things was from a manager who was quite happy to tell me that I wasn't ready for it. And whilst I thought that hurts, it was a really important lesson. What he did was he gave me a couple of projects to do, and they were projects that involved bringing other people in. But he said, but I'm not going to tell people you're some big project manager. You don't have any authority over these people, but you do need to get them to help you out with this stuff. I was like, well, how am I going to do that? Can you not just tell them to, you're the manager, blah, blah. He said to me, if you can't lead without wearing the stripes, then you don't deserve the stripes. And that simple sentence has stuck with me forever, because it's so true. Like, if you can't inspire people to want to work alongside you and work to help your goals, even if they're their goals partially as well, but if you can't inspire people to follow you without having a title, then you don't deserve the title, because otherwise you will forever be leaning on that title. Whenever you see someone who says, you need to do this because I'm your manager, there's nothing worse than hearing that, because pulling rank is the lowest form of management, really. You should be able to inspire people if you deserve to be deserve to have that role in the first place.
I really like that example, and I think inspiring and empowering people is some of the best forms of leadership, right? And people really resonate to that kind of approach. I guess it's long gone the approach of micromanagement, and now if you even mention that term, most people will run away and say, "Look, I'm looking for a new job now. I can't work in these conditions." So I totally resonate with that. And if we talk about generally your experience across a range of big and small companies, how has those experiences helped you and been instrumental for you to understand and enable customers to elevate their usage of a product and to help foster those customer relationships with them?
It's a great question. So I think one of the interesting things is that although I've worked in companies of various different sizes, the one thing that I find is really interesting is that the customer size doesn't necessarily change. Very, very big organizations still get very small customers, and very small organizations still get very large customers. So the thing that's been most interesting for me has been the fact that I've been addressing the same size of customers. Like, there's a spectrum to it, of course, but I've been within the same size of customers, everything from like SMB, mid-market, all the way to enterprise. And the the perspectives that I've had have been interesting, because I've seen what it's like to work with those customers when we have a lot of infinite resources, and whenever we have very, very little resources and we need to do as much as we can with them. And what I think is really funny is that very large organizations are great at scaling back how much resource they put into it, and very small companies allow themselves to drown by throwing everything they've got into it. So that's allowed me to understand more deeply the cost of servicing a customer, and to be hyper vigilant on it, because one of the things that I always try to assess whenever we're doing CS with customers is, how much effort do we actually need to put in with each customer to get them to success. And one of the interesting things that's come out of that has been the focus on what the customer brings to the table. So I think one of the most important lessons for me in that has been, regardless of what type of customer that I'm working with, or what kind of software that we're working on together, whatever vendor I'm working for at that time, the most important thing is, what does the customer bring to the table, and what is the effort required from both sides to make that project a success. And I think if you're just looking at what you bring to the table and not at what the customer brings to the table, then you're missing a really key part. So yeah, I would say that's probably one of the key things.
I agree. And if we look at small companies, we can all appreciate why they try to throw the resources towards the customers that they're working with, because they're still in that growth stage. They want to retain all of the customers they have, make sure that they're happy, and hopefully their brand and reputation grows with it. So I understand that. And as the businesses grow, it's all more of a strategic positioning of where the resources need to be. But also, I find sometimes the largest accounts are the ones that have the most attention. And as you said, having that experience to kind of know what resources need to be allocated to maximize efficiency is important as you grow. And as a leader, something I always, discuss within the leadership spaces, the element of diversity, equity, and inclusion across all the different functions in the organization, and how, as leaders, you can really help to drive that. Is there any initiatives in your current role or in previous roles where you've been able to influence this?
Yeah, so Secure Code Warrior, where I'm at the moment, is has a great approach to diversity. It's something that sits very much at the core of the company. And when you look through our CS teams, they're easily the most diverse teams that I've worked with in the past. And I think we really benefit from that because we've done a great job on hiring for attitudes, not just experience. And I think that really comes through because our team, not just our team, but also the teams that we sit next to, gel so well. And I think having that diverse set of backgrounds and experiences is essential because we're going to have the same with our customers as well. And if we only hire one subset of people, then we are going to struggle to be able to work with a diverse set of customers. And the team is stronger because we have all these different backgrounds, and we share so much with each other that it's a great way of going about it. We also have to address the fact that as an industry, we're really bad at this. We're really bad at this, and it's hurting us. It's hurting us as a society and as an industry. So it's something that we need to fix. And I think where I'm at the moment, Secure Code Warrior is doing a fantastic job of that, and it's something that they really champion out in the market as well. So yeah.
That's great to and just as I move towards a next question on best practices and trends in the industry, I noticed that you've transitioned now into a new role, and that role over the last year is more of a learning platform, right, for cybersecurity and development professionals. Is that right? Can you talk to me a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it has been an interesting one for me insofar as Secure Code Warrior is the first learning platform that I've had the chance to work with and work with customers with. But I think the very interesting thing is we're not a training company as such. We're still a cybersecurity company, and what we're doing is when we focus on the output, the effects of what our platform has, it's not just people learning how to code securely. Like that from the outset definitely looks like it, but the actual impacts are reduction in vulnerabilities and having your code base just cleaner and with less vulnerabilities being introduced into your code. So in that regard, we almost have the same output as other effective controls. But where other effective controls like scanning tools go into the code itself, we are starting right over at the starting left, as we would say, as everyone's saying these days. We're starting left in that we're starting with the developers. So where we protect you is by focusing on before the code is even written, by
Yeah.
upskilling people. So in that regard, it's almost surprisingly similar to some of the platforms that I've used in the past, in that we're solving a very similar issue. It's just that we're not doing it halfway through the development process. We're giving you a cleaner process to begin with, which was quite similar to when I was doing threat modeling with Arius Risk. That's a design stage activity and is focused on ensuring that you're building cleaner software or less vulnerable software, that sort of thing. So, and what's been interesting is the challenges with rolling out a secure coding program are very similar to the challenges of building a security champions program or building a threat modeling program. They all require organizational and cultural change, but the effect of doing that well is an almost seismic shift in how your engineering teams create software. So at a high level, whilst it looks like it's a learning platform, I think the conversations around how you roll that out and why you would want to roll those out are almost surprisingly similar to and a tool that looks at your software itself. So very surprising similarities there, which for myself definitely helped me get up to speed, because I thought there was going to be a bit of a learning curve in terms of how do my conversations with customers now change now that I'm talking about a learning platform. And the reality of it is they've changed very little, because we're still dealing with security teams and developer teams looking to build more secure software. So in that regard, actually, it was very, very similar, which was surprising, but quite welcome. I wanted to hit the ground running, of course, so that was useful.
And given your role then now, where you're focused more on the very early stages of making sure that you're reducing the vulnerabilities and the efficiency more of the developers that are writing that critical code for software companies, but also end users as well. Something I wanted to find out from you personally was if there was any best practices, not just from a customer success perspective, but within the cybersecurity industry generally, that you would champion and think are good for other leaders in the space to hear about.
Yeah, so in this space in general, I think, well, if we talk about the cybersecurity space in general, and then I'll talk about customer success specifically. In terms of cybersecurity, I think one of the biggest things is that whenever we talk about certain types of companies, like let's say, for example, whenever people talk about Tesla, some people call it an automotive company, some people call it a tech company. And I remember whenever I first heard that a few years ago, people were like, wow, yeah, no, you're right. We actually need to look at businesses differently. It's the same with Airbnb, same with Uber. It's not a taxi company, it's a technology company, and then same with Airbnb and property. But the reality of it is now is that almost every company, if you look at it, is a tech company. In some regard, you're definitely going to have some kind of software, either software you've built or software you use with other customers, that you need to secure. Now, if you're building the software, then you're going to have developers and the right tools in place who can build the software securely. But ultimately, if we take, for example, a bank, huge numbers of customers, and you look at them and you go, they're in finance, they're a financial organization. And that's true, but they also have a banking app that countless numbers of customers use every day for some of their most secure personal details that they have. So really, a bank is a software company, if you think about it now. And they most of them now take that approach. They didn't always, but they now do. And so I think that's something that we need to address in terms of cybersecurity in general. In terms of customer success, so customer success is still a very evolving process. I think it's now, there are certain areas of the world that are very mature. We're getting there in the UK as being one of the more mature parts of the world in terms of how mature their customer success processes are. But we still, as an industry, have to move away from customer success just being this post-sales thing. Like, we sell to the customer and then customer success deals with it. Customer success has to be the function that informs the rest of the company and brings the rest of the company along for the ride, because we've got loads of stuff to do. It needs to begin all the way from marketing before sales even speak to them. So customer success is and always will be a company issue, not a function issue. And the companies that get that will do it better than the other ones that don't, that still go, all post-sales stuff belongs to customer success, when actually we're a key part of that there, but it's a customer success is a culture, not a function.
I like the way you put that, and I think some of the points you mentioned about best practices in the cybersecurity space and how you approach each business and their element of having software either implemented or as a core offering of their own is something many companies, if they aren't doing, need to look at it from that perspective. And just again, want to thank you for your time. But just before I let you go, I just wanted to dive into a few quick fire questions, which is something that we do on the show. For many people, they may not know that you're a huge Formula One fan, so I'll start there. What would be your favorite Formula One team and why?
I am a diehard McLaren fan the whole way, not just in the good times back, years ago, but also in the era of Stoffel van Dorn and Fernando Alonso, whenever their car was useless. I was still a fan, and I've still got the team caps and jackets to prove it.
And who would you say is your favorite sports player or person?
So that's a tricky one, because So I used to follow things like UFC and boxing, and there was a fighter called Frankie Edgar, and you'll not really see him anymore. I think he retired at least a couple of years ago or more. But back in the heyday of when I used to follow it, Frankie Edgar was brilliant because he brought amateur boxing skills rather than professional boxing skills. A lot of people, I'll go into it because that's a podcast of its own, but a lot of people don't realize the difference between someone who's a very, very experienced amateur boxer and someone who's a very seasoned professional boxer. You get a lot of professional boxers in, or that level in MMA, but the amateur boxing where it's sharp, tight, quick, he brought this different angle to it that I really loved. And he was a nice guy. But other than that, I've probably got a top 10 list, but we'll go with Frankie Edgar for now.
Perfect. And just last of all, what would be your favorite meal?
Yeah, so do you know, I always want to lean towards something like pizza, but then I think, nah, this is going to sound strange because everyone expects it to be a big cheat meal. But listen, there are so many different varieties of soup out there. You can never get bored of the soup. So many different types. Either that or literally any kind of dumpling of any kind.
I love dumplings myself.
Oh, yeah. Dumplings all day, every day.
And last question from another guest, which I always share with the next guest, which is, as a people manager, what is the hardest part of your job?
I'd say probably delivering bad news. Because I think delivering bad news to a customer is something that you get very good at very quickly, because you got a lot of bad news to deliver to customers sometimes. If there's a bug, there's going to be a lot of people you're going to be talking to about it. If something big goes wrong, or if you've dropped the ball somewhere, you learn to shoulder that and build up a resilience to it. But whenever it's your team, you tend to relate to them on a different level, and so it becomes a lot more difficult. That's probably the hardest part, is trying to deliver some bad news to them.
Okay, and what would be a question that you would leave for the next guest?
I think one of the most, what is currently a very popular topic that wasn't always, was imposter syndrome. And I think a lot of people are either experiencing or have experienced imposter syndrome in the past. So I would love to know how, for the next guest, have they had a period of their career where they suffered from imposter syndrome, and to talk through how they eventually overcame that, and looking back on it, what did they learn from that period of their career?
Perfect. Well, I'll be sure to share that to the next guest. But Jonny, again, I want to thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, hearing your insights and also your views on some important topics. But for the rest of your week, I hope you have a great one, and we'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed this. So thank you for that, and hope to speak again soon.
Thank you, Jonny. Take care now.
Guys.